reviewing my latest book club book, The Immortalists. I don't have any makeup on. I'm dying from allergies, so we just all get smudged anyway, so you'll have to deal with me au natural. So this was a book club book. I found quite interesting because basically it's about 4 siblings who, when they're young, they live in New York, to sneak out to see a fortune teller who tells them the day they are going to die. So this is obviously an interesting premise because then, you know, it starts your mind thinking of like, what would I do if somebody told me this? Oh, what? And then it's basically about how their lives have been affected by that prophecy. I may have to cut to sneeze. It's coming on. Bear with me. Oh, right. Sorry. Anybody who's got allergies, I suffer with you. But yeah, so this book then looks at their lives and how their lives develop because of this prophecy. I'm gonna go into each life, so if you don't want to know more about their lives, you should probably skip forward to the number that I'm gonna put down here, because I don't know what the number is gonna be yet. And then like just go on. But within the lives, I'm not gonna spoil too much. I'm just gonna kind of talk about their lives a little bit, because I think it's just important to talk about it. So yes, here we go. So the first sibling that the book deals with is Simon, who is the one whose date of death was the first one, basically. The book actually basically goes from the first death to the second, to the third sibling, to the fourth sibling, and it connects from when that sibling passed away, didn't pass away, whatever shall happen, right? So it kind of like only looks at their lives from the moment that the previous sibling story is finished, if that makes sense. So the first story is the youngest, I think. Yes, I think so. Which is Simon, and his death date is the first one. And Simon is actually a gay boy. And his younger sister, well, older sister, but youngest sister, Clara, encourages him to go to San Francisco because she knows he's gay. She's the only sibling that knows he's gay. And she knows that Simon will not be able to live himself in his authentic way unless he goes to San Francisco. And that gives me a moment of like, go to San Francisco, boy, because the alternative would have been for him to take on like the family business and like to keep the family business, which is in the textile industry, alive. And I was like, please don't do that. And he did go to San Francisco, yay! And he basically talks about him having his first gay experiences, starting a relationship, becoming a dancer, and then it like keeps going until basically the date that his death was prophesied for. And I'm not going to go into whether he dies, whether he doesn't die, but the story finishes on basically the date that he was destined to die. Then the second story is about Clara, who's the girl that goes with Simon. Her date is basically the second one up. She's actually very, very interesting. I found that super interesting, that story. She's a female magician. She basically got inspired by her grandmother, great-grandmother? I think grandmother, who was also a circus performer. And she got inspired by that, and she was named after her grandmother as well, and she kind of, I suppose, feels that's her legacy. So she really gets into magic. She meets a man who supports her with it, and they basically create an act. But she really struggles with alcoholism, mental health issues, and it is really, really affecting her until the date of her death, potentially not death, I won't tell. But then, yeah, that's her story. I found this really interesting because you don't read much about female magicians, and this book is set in the so the siblings hear about it, I think, in the late 60s, and then it basically starts, bear with me, from 1978, because it kind of, once they get the prophecy, it skips forward quite a bit, so the book keeps skipping quite a bit. So then it starts in 1978 again, actually after their father died, and then it skips forward basically again to Clara's story. But I found it very, very interesting because you don't hear much about female magicians, right? And it was very interesting to read about. Sometimes it was quite technical, but I found it really, really interesting to read about, and like about her mental health struggles and sort of feelings of worthiness and things like that. I found that very, very interesting. Then the third sibling is Daniel. Daniel basically becomes a doctor, so it obviously connects from after Clara's death date passed. So, and one should say that all the 4 siblings live quite separate lives. So it's almost like this prophecy has kind of driven them apart a little bit. Or maybe it was just always going to happen this way because they have very different interests. Like obviously Simon is a gay man, Clara is really into the magician stuff, whereas Daniel and Varia, who's the oldest sibling, are very much more analytical, scientific sort of thing. But anyways, Daniel is a doctor. He works for the military. I actually found his story probably the least interesting because it's I don't know, I just didn't feel I got much of his character, even though the story was like pretty much the same length. I just didn't feel I got as much of his character, and the first 2 stories actually kind of spanned quite a wide amount of years, whereas the second story, the third story and the fourth story kind of look at very like contained periods of time rather than skipping forward quite a bit. So I felt like I only saw him in a very contained bit of time, the way he was in that contained bit of time, and I couldn't connect with him as well, maybe because I didn't find it interesting. It did bring up some interesting things around like military, going to war, because it was obviously around the time of like, that the US went to war and all of that. So that was quite interesting. And the interesting thing, I suppose, about Daniel is that he almost wanted to take the prophecy into his own hands and to make it almost not happen. But in a way, I felt that was quite disconnected from who he was, because he was a very measured, sort of, not boring, but basically he wasn't a kind of very fiery personality. He wasn't very brave or very known for doing outrageous things like Clara or Simon were. So it felt a bit strange for him to then be like, well, I'm just gonna take this into my own hands, sort of thing. So the story finishes basically around his death day and then moves on to the last sibling, which is Varia. Varia is actually the one that got a very late death day. So while the others were all supposed to die quite early on, like the Daniel was supposed to die just before he turned 50, I believe. Varia was destined to die at 88. So it's like, oh, good life. Yay. And her story was interesting. So she works as a scientific researcher in a primate lab that works on like how to make people live longer lives. And she does primate research where basically they have like different experiments to like deny primates nutrition to see, or calories, to see if that will make them live longer. And it's like she lives a very sort of, she has no kids, no family really. She doesn't really connect with the other siblings. She doesn't really have anything in her life. So her life was very interesting because it felt like, because she was so afraid of getting close to somebody, that she just disconnected from everything, because she had obviously experienced a lot of loss, you know, loss of her father, potentially losses from her siblings. So it's like, you know, it just felt like this sense of this looming sense of I could lose my siblings meant she was like didn't want to connect to them. It was very interesting. And it's like, because she didn't want to connect, she like purposely did everything she could so that she wouldn't get hurt, which was very interesting. Her bit had a lot of like very scientific talk, which was a little bit too tough, but I actually found it quite interesting in a way. And there were certain discussions around the ethics of like animal experimentation and sort of that sort of thing. Yeah, and that's kind of where the book finishes. So every book kind of just tells you, let me show you, what time period it looks after. So like this is various bit, so then we will tell you like the time period it looks after. So Daniel's would have been before this and all that. So all in all, I really liked Immortalists. I found it really engaging to read. I was actually quite interested in the fact that all their lives were quite different. It felt almost like I was reading 4 different books. It was very interesting to me because they're a Jewish family and the Jewishness is centered quite a bit in the story. And I feel like for some reason lately I read a lot of Jewish stories. I'm also watching Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and there were a lot of parallels, which was very weird. Yeah, but overall I really enjoyed it. It had like, it was very interesting because obviously I had this touch of like self-fulfilling prophecy, you know, by trying to avoid the date of your death, you're just gonna move yourself towards it, right? The premise was very interesting. I gave it a 4.5. When we were discussing it in book club, a lot of people actually didn't like it as much. They felt that just because you only had those snippets of life, they felt that they couldn't really connect to the characters because they didn't know enough. Because there was just like certain very contained bits, and there wasn't, it didn't go very deep, and I can certainly appreciate that. Like for example, Clara, I would have loved to know more about like her mental health issues and her relationship with the man she married, and like I would have just liked probably more, but I would have made the book a lot longer. But overall I did really like it. Would certainly recommend reading it. Don't regret that I had to spend money to get it, because my library didn't have it. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it. It's a good read. It's not going to change your life, but it's a good read.